I think probably the biggest thing is to find clients that you have a synergy with. A lot of times MSPs and techs are fighting with their clients about, recommendations and support. And a long time ago decided, I'm not going to fight. I'm not going to sit across the table and try to convince you why you need to use me.
Hey guys, Damian Stevens, host of MSP Mindset. Today, I'm joined by Marvin B, or Uncle Marv, as he's known as Uncle Marv's IT business podcast, and the solopreneur of MB Systems. Today, we talked about how you can build a solo MSP business that gives you the time freedom you've always desired and give yourself the permission to be happy where you are and to do it intentionally. If you'd like to learn about how Marv did that, has managed to travel to an amazing number of conferences per year, and have multiple podcasts with his time freedom, don't miss out on our conversation today. I want to dig into something because you're the only person I think I've met that is staying small by design. So why the heck do you do that, and what does that mean?
Well, I should probably say that I'm not the only one. Mm-hmm. There are other people in this industry that are solo for specific reasons. A lot of time it's the area that they're in. They just don't have the ability to scale. Mm-hmm. If they're in a small town, or they may have limitations. Some people are doing this as a side gig.
Sure.
And of course, our industry has a tendency to label, the side giggers.
Yeah.
But that's how I started, to be honest.
Yeah.
And my reasoning for staying small actually came about because I tried to grow in the beginning. Mm. And I had an admin person. I had 2 techs working for me. And I'm not going to say that it was great. It wasn't bad, but it was frustrating.
Yeah.
And the type of service that I was giving to my clients, once I realized that I could do a lot of it remotely and I could automate some things, I didn't need the techs at that point. Mm. So I just made a decision that I'm just going to do this as long as it works. And if I grow, I'll grow, but I'm not going to force it to happen. And it's funny because I have grown the business in a sense, but I still haven't gotten to the point where I've had to have that additional full-time person work with me. I've been able to do it with subcontractors. So I found that model works for me, and my customers are okay with it. Because a lot of my clients, they may have a satellite office in another city. So it's not like I need that full-time person here. I just need help when I need assistance in that other city. So I just partner up with people in those cities. And that's my model, and it works.
Any advice to other MSP owners that are listening that feel like they're trapped in the headcount race or not sure how to set up? I know there's a lot of fear around not only contractors, but maybe more specifically, like, I don't know if I can talk to another MSP. What if they steal my client? Or what if I just contract or get somebody and then they're horrible? I'm sure you've had to grapple with those issues.
Yeah. I would say this. First of all, you cannot live in fear. And
well, I was going to say, I think I've done that a good bit, so I think I have, but maybe I shouldn't. Yeah.
But this is one of those industries where, it is cutthroat to a degree, but the community over the years has gotten better, where MSPs are realizing that there's enough business out there that we can work together and not step on each other's feet. I go back to when I worked with one of my buddies here, and we would help each other out with projects because both of us at the time, it was just us. So that was our way of scaling when we needed to. We'd call our buddies and he'd help me and I'd help him. And I remember one of his clients asked me during a visit, because I had to go for something. I don't remember the details, but I was there and not him. And they asked me, they're like, can you support us instead of him? And I said, doesn't matter whether I want to or not. You're his client, and I'm not going to do that to him. You have to approach him about that.
Yeah.
And the good thing about that was that the client respected the fact that I did that. I mean, they didn't say it at the time. They said it later.
Sure.
But my friend also respected that, that I wasn't going to do that to him, and that, we're still friends to this day. But I think in terms of whatever business model you choose, if you choose to stay small in this industry, you have to just ignore the noise of everybody saying you have to do this. I'm sorry, our industry is just like any other, where you don't have to do anything that somebody else is doing. Do what works for you and do what the market calls for. We have a lot of customers in this industry that don't want the bigger MSP. And until that changes, somebody needs to service them. So there are plenty of opportunities. Now, again, it might depend on your area, because here in South Florida, there's a ton of people down here. There's a ton of businesses. So there's a lot of opportunity for both large and small IT solution providers. So it's got to work in terms of the numbers, whether you can do that or not. And then, of course, the customer has to be willing to pay to some degree. I do have people that when I approach them and put together, my contract for them and stuff, and they look at it and say, you're just as much as the other guys. And I can say confidently that, well, I do what they do. Now, there may be some nuances. I'm not offering 24/7 support, but I'm offering much more personalized service. And that's where you've got to have a trade-off. So it has to work both ways. But I don't think that it has to be just one MSP model or solution provider model, whatever name we come up with that covers all of us. So, I mean, the advice is look for the opportunities. They're there. If you want to stay small for whatever reason, you can do that. There are plenty of vendors in this space that will support us as small businesses. So don't think, that if you go to a vendor and they have a high minimum, that's fine. Those vendors, that's their choice. Find another vendor that will support a small business.
I love that. So you've been able to grow through automation. You've been able to grow through, it sounds like the right customer fit. And I know there's probably somebody listening that goes, wait, I've never thought about that. I feel like I have to get to this next rung because everybody, like you said, there's a lot of noise. Everybody's saying grow, 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 right? So why are you intentional about that? Is your goal to is it from a lifestyle perspective? Is it from a I don't want as many people perspective? Is it just being about intentional? Is it something else?
I'll be honest. Every time I get asked this question, I always end up coming back to the answer of, I'm happy where I am now.
That's a great answer.
And not
many MSPs can say that, by the way.
I think that is
sizes.
Yeah, that's the point is, what is it? What is your end goal? And I'll be honest, I don't have an end goal yet. Now, I do have plans if certain things happen that, there is an exit strategy. My clients have a way of moving on. If something were to happen to me, like they're not going to be left in a lurch if something happens. So from that perspective, yeah, we're taken care of. But for me, I like what I'm doing. I like the way my business runs. Do I work more hours than most MSPs or most techs want to? Probably. But actually have a lot more freedom than some people have as well. And a lot of that is the way that I've designed my business around the way I support my clients and the tools that I've put in place where even when I'm sitting here in this office all day long, it's not that constant ringing of the phone. It's not the constant ticket alerts coming in. I'm happy. And to be honest, I'm more worried about being happy than being rich is probably the shortest way to put it.
Yeah. I love
Is
that.
there opportunity for money out there? Is there opportunity to grow? Yeah, I've probably missed a couple of ships where I could have, done big things. But at the end of the day, I got to be able to go home and be content with my day, not be frustrated, not be angry, be able to chat with the wife, and enjoy life.
Yeah. Is there a certain niche or avatar that fits the best with you from a client perspective?
So I fell into the legal space.
Okay.
That is what seems to have been working for a while. And when I first started, I ended up in the auto repair space where I got in touch with a reseller of PPG paints, and the paint shops controlled the body shops because they would actually pay for the equipment to go in. And so I remember the early years, I'm running around to 100 body shops.
Oh, wow.
But I'm getting paid by the paint company.
Hmm.
And then, of course, around, I think it was 2008, all that changed when the paint companies are like, we can't be paying for computers for these shops anymore.
Yeah.
And so that changed. But I had already had one or two attorney clients. And I had a consultant friend that had some more opportunities, and I took that. So that's my main avatar. They're probably about 65% of my business. And then, I had a medical client. I've got some architectural firms. But the bulk avatar would be the legal space.
It's really, really interesting. So how the heck do you deal with medical and architecture and sounds like primarily legal? And the thing is, I've talked to you multiple times and you just seem like the phone isn't ringing off the hook. You seem calm, cool, collected. So what did you crack? Where's the code you cracked that especially most MSPs don't, irregardless of size, and with your clients?
I don't know that I've cracked a code, but I've found some synergy with the clients I have. I think probably the biggest thing is to find clients that you have a synergy with, meaning a lot of times MSPs and techs are fighting with their clients about, recommendations and support. And I just, a long time ago, decided I'm not going to fight with anybody. I'm not going to sit across the table and try to convince you why you need to use me. If we can't, do that in a civil manner, if we can't do that, in a simple way that both you understand and I understand how we need to work together. I understand your business. You understand, what you need in tech support from me. That was the big thing. So I started to eliminate a lot of those types of situations where I was constantly fighting with the customers. So now, I'm not going to say I don't have the phone ringing,
Sure.
those days still exist. But it's odd because we took a phone call this morning and, they call and they tell Kim, I'm so sorry to bother you.
That's funny.
And I'm like, no, you're supposed to call us. But finding that synergy where they understand that I'm not out just to make money. I'm not out to always sell them the latest gadget. I'm here to help them run their business better. And I can only do that by being a true partner with them. understanding what it is that you need the computers to do? What is it that you need your network to do? What do your employees need to do to be more productive? How can I help with that? And we'll get to the price, after, we figure this out. And that's just worked. And it's something where I was trying to jot down some ideas. I think having the client loyalty has been a byproduct of that. To where once I establish that rapport with them and get them to the point of whatever decision they need to make, we're not doing it without talking to Marv. And I like that.
Yeah. That's how it should be. It's not always how it is.
Yeah.
So how do you set those boundaries? I think there's a lot of us that struggle. And then do you charge every time they call? Or is it part of the managed service contract? Because most of us that sell this flat rate, per seat, they can call as much as they want. So sometimes you have the people that do.
Yeah. So I have a very hybrid model when it comes to everything, including my pricing. So one of the things that we don't do is charge for everything. We have a mixed pricing model. So it's a combination of, per server, per computer, per user. And I've got an algorithm, for each client on that. But the biggest thing is not to make them feel like they're being billed for everything. So, I did have a client for a long time who, the contract is written as a remote support agreement. And the concept was, if we can do it by phone or by remote, no charge. But if we have to come on site, there's a charge. And they were so adamant to have their users, don't call them, don't make them come on site. It's going to cost us more.
That's funny.
So I had to blend my service to where I told them, look, there's some on-site built in. I don't want you to worry about having to be billed every time I walk out the door. Are there things that are going to have to be billed for? Yeah. If it's, significant, if I'm there all day, if it's an installation, there's going to be some costs. But I don't want you to worry. And it made sense because I was talking to attorneys who that's how they're built on the fact that everything they do is billable. And I just said, look, if you call me, you're not going to see that on the invoice. If it's just a few minutes, if it's, now if I'm on with an hour for you, yeah, that'll be on there. But most of the time it's going to be covered by the plan. Sometimes it might not be, but you'll know.
Yeah.
So having that fear taken away of, not being nickeled and dimed has helped. So it's not the same plan for everybody. So I know that that's probably difficult for some people to do because they want to have, the three plans. You choose from one of these three plans. I don't do that. My deal is customized for each client. Now, the components are the same.
Right.
But every client has a mixed bundle. And, I am trying to make it easier so that when they understand, here's what you're being billed for, they can see line by line, okay, yep, we've got this many users. Yep, we've got this many computers. Yep, this was a new server we had to install. So there's that price. But they don't see on my invoice that, a user called me 20 times and there's 20 charges on there. Right. In fact, I had a customer that was like, you don't put enough information on your invoice. We at least want to see, what's been done. And then I've had people that are like, yeah, we don't want to see all that. we just want to know that we're paying you and stuff gets taken care of.
Yeah. Yeah, that makes sense. So for folks that are either struggling with growing, struggling with dealing with all the noise that they're not enough unless they grow or hit some headcount or revenue or some other milestone, or they're just, maybe they're struggling to move from the side gig to full time, or maybe they bounced off I've hired a few folks and I don't like it. Like, what advice would you have to folks to understand they can choose a different route? They don't have to hit a certain revenue or headcount milestone to be a real business.
I think the first thing is understanding what a real business is from a legal standpoint. I mean, if you're registered with your, local municipality and you've got a legal business address and you're, signed up with the state to collect your sales tax, if that's what you need to do, then you're a business.
Mm-hmm.
And that is enough to some degree. The next step is to obviously make sure you can make a living at it.
Mm-hmm.
And then the third step is to be happy. I mean, that's that's kind of my stepping stones there. So when you're looking at what your business should be.
Should's the operative word there.
Yeah. It should match what you need it to be and what you want it to be. And that's really the only 2 points. So what you need it to be, obviously, is can you make enough money to live, if that's going to be your primary source of income.
Mm-hmm.
If it's a side gig, that's a whole different set of parameters.
Mm-hmm.
And that's a whole nother discussion that kind of doesn't play here. So I'm going to talk from the standpoint, if you're doing this full time, or you want to do this full time, you just need to figure out what is it requiring of your business so that you can support yourself, your family, your lifestyle, whatever that is, and price everything accordingly,
mm-hmm.
which is probably the biggest thing that a lot of people have is how do you price stuff?
Right.
There are people that are like, we talked about it earlier, the pricing per user or per device. And I know that, our industry has a tendency to push one or the other.
Mm-hmm.
There are people that have found success in the flat rate, where they just figure out here's the number for everything, and that way the customer's happy, and that works for them. But you got to find out what works for you.
Mm-hmm.
And, I had to find a model that worked for me, which was kind of a hybrid of all of that. But the baseline to figuring that out is finding out that magic number. What is the number you have to make per? Now, I actually did it the other way. I was like, well, how much do I need per year?
Mm.
And then back that out per month. And then back that out per device or per user or per client. I mean, you've got to figure something out to that degree. What is it that you need to make? And then work backwards from there as to how you do your pricing. And make sure you build in, your profit margin as well. So that's what I've done. And I've gone to a couple of sites to figure out, what is the median, salary for technicians in my area, for businesses in my area, and that's kind of how I gauge stuff. So, in terms of the rat race, all these KPIs and metrics and all of that stuff, the bigger you get, the more you need those. But in the early years, or as a smaller MSP, not so much.
Mm. I love that.
Just find the number that works and make the numbers work for you.
I love that. I think there's somebody listening that needed to hear that. How did you find time to start, on top of all these things, a podcast? And why? And it's just not the typical MSP.
Well, there's a lot more people doing podcasts now than when I started.
Mm-hmm.
But the short answer to the question is you just find the time.
Mm-hmm.
As with anything important in life, if you want it to happen, you make the time. So that's what I did. Going in more detail about why. So around 2013, 14, when I had just, no, maybe not just, a couple of years before I had finally gotten rid of my last tech. And so I was doing all my stuff, building my processes and my automations and looking for tools. I had not yet run across the RMM PSA set of stuff. And I came across the podcast community where I don't know how I came across it, but it was just something I did. And as I'm listening, I'm like, hey, those guys are just like me. And so I started listening more, got involved. And around the time that I really committed to being, a listener, the shows went away. And I was like, wait a minute, what? And the owner of the network at the time, it was actually a network of podcasts, had reached out to say that, hey, we're looking for people to come take these over. Anybody wanting to do that? And I actually waited too long, because when I finally said, yeah, I'll reach out, somebody had already taken the spot, but they partnered me up with that person to help them when they needed it, to be a frequent guest on the show. And so I did that for a while. I was just kind of a helper in that sense. And then the opportunity came to bring back another show that was focused on businesses, because the show I was on was focused on the solo tech, the small business, the residential. But there was a podcast that was focused on transitioning to business support. And the talent part of that podcast, because it was a host it was two hosts, but one person was just kind of there to, manage the podcast, ask the questions, and then there was somebody there that was actually, giving out the tech tips and the information. Well, the talent person wanted to still do that, but needed somebody to run the logistical stuff. And I said, well, I can do that. So that was when I committed to actually doing it. And at that point, I was still very active, like playing basketball and doing all that stuff. But I was at the point where I knew I wasn't going to be one of those guys that played ball till I was 70 and couldn't play anymore. So I knew there would be a point in time where I'm like, I wanted to get out while I was still healthy. I didn't want to be, waking up with bum knees and a bad back and stuff. So when that opportunity came up, I said, you know what, I'm going to transition from basketball to podcasting. So that's when I did that. And then the opportunity came for me to take over the podcast full time. And here we are.
Now we have Uncle Marv's IT Business Podcast. So why is this important, or what is the podcast a vehicle for? Why does it keep doing it?
So it started out as simply a way to kind of give back to the community. There were, in those early days, a lot of tips that I got from the people that did this before me. And there was a lot of conversation that happened that wasn't happening with, my local businesses here. Back then, tech companies didn't want to talk to other tech companies. Yeah. But we could talk through podcasting because we weren't worried about somebody in another state, taking our business. So that's kind of how it started. And then it was just a matter of, when, the opportunity came to bring the show back, I'm like, I can give back to this. And that's where it started. Now it's evolved into a lot more, because now there is this push in me to make sure that there is a voice in the space. You mentioned for the smaller, tech companies, I think there needs to be a public voice that says it's okay for us to be here.
That's right.
And a resource to those smaller companies to say, hey, look, if you're looking for this in a vendor, if you're looking for another company that's, succeeding in this area, or you're looking to chat about something, I want to provide that space to them. So the opportunity now is to provide more of a support system and kind of assist a lot of the communities that are out there, the Facebook groups, the other podcast communities. If I can lend my support to them, I'm going to do that.
I love that. You can tell you're passionate about it. Share what, if you don't mind, Uncle Marv, share what are some of your biggest lessons or learnings from all of these podcasts and all these interviews that you've done?
Well, I'm going to ask you to qualify that, because are you talking about what have I learned just in our space? What have I learned from my business personally?
Yeah, I guess in particular, maybe from the podcast, right? You're doing it, you're giving back. Has there been key lessons, key takeaways? Obviously, not everybody's running a podcast, even if they're running an IT business. So I'm curious if you've had some key lessons from that.
I think that probably the one key thing is that people want to engage in community. They want to have access to resources.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that, if there was a time that I thought, you know what, I'm not really, making it big in this podcast thing. I'm not getting 100,000 listeners and stuff like that. But
Right.
There are people that I have found that listen to my show and have reached out afterwards to say, hey, thank you for that. And at first I was worried that, if I'm only reaching, one or two people about this thing, then I don't know if that's worth it. But when I really sat back and thought about it, each of those conversations that I've had, if you add them all up, it's actually a lot.
Mm-hmm.
But for each individual, it's something different that hit with them, whether it was a referral to a vendor or whether it was a tip for their business. I've even had some where they were like, you know what, I like the podcast, I like the business stuff, but you actually dove into a personal thing that I was happy you brought up that needs to be brought up. So what I have found is that there are people listening, and they don't have to listen to every show, and they don't have to believe in everything that I chat about. But if there's something that they connect with that gives them support to continue on, whether it's in business or life or just be happy about stuff, that's what the main thing is for me. So that's kind of what has resonated with me the most. Now, there's obviously other things that, have worked out in terms of, having, the podcast has given me access to vendors where I can now, talk to vendors, through the podcast. It's helped me with some backdoor stuff for my business. That has been nice. I really can't say much more than that. I mean, it's I'd say the last 18 months has been so much of a whirlwind. I probably haven't had enough time to sit back and think about, oh my goodness, what have I learned in the last 18 months?
Let me switch gears for a moment. So a lot going on. You got MB Systems, you've got your podcasts, you got all kinds of interesting things going on. The industry's changing, the world's changing, all these things. What are some things you're looking forward to?
So the short answer is that I don't really look too far ahead.
Okay.
So, I don't have like a bucket list of things that I'm looking forward to. I am kind of in a space right now where I do wonder, where are things going to be for our industry in the coming years? We are at a very interesting time where some stuff's going to have to happen. We have some of the biggest cybersecurity threats happening that are affecting everyone, both small and large.
Mm-hmm.
as solution providers, we have to pay attention to both sides, our clients as well as our vendors, which puts us in a very tough spot. It's a lot to keep up with, especially if we have to make a decision as to which tool we're going to use. And if something happens to that tool, what does that mean for us? Not just, for our clients, but for us, because we're going to end up in court. If something happens, and it may not be our fault. So that's a very interesting thing we have to pay attention to. I know that a lot of attention is being placed on the fact that you've got to have the right contract. You've got to force your clients, to do the minimal stuff, and clients are pushing back. There's a lot of parts of our industry that are commoditized. So it is an interesting time. So I think the next, 2 to 5 years is going to be a very big window for us to figure some things out. So tech-wise, that's kind of where I'm looking at. And I'm hoping that I make it through that time and I've got another 10 to 15 years where I can figure out what's my end goal going to be. So right now, again, I'm content with where I'm at. I'm happy with where I'm at. So I don't tend to look too far down the road as to what's next. I'm just going to keep doing what I'm doing, and as things need to change, I'll change.
I love that. What about with all your different podcasts? What's exciting or what's got you fired up or passionate right now?
I think the biggest thing has been what has happened in the last 18 months. Like I said, there's been a lot of new opportunities because of the podcast. So I'm excited just to see where that continues to go. Being able to go to conferences as a member of the media has been great. Not just from the fact of, one, I can go to more conferences, although it might be too many to some degree. But I can actually get access to some things that most people don't get access to in terms of, sitting in with the C-levels of some of these companies and hearing their roadmap, firsthand from a media perspective, being able to interview people that I probably would not have access to if I were to just reach out on my own. So that has been good. Getting some monetary support, which is something I didn't push in the beginning. And part of that was, in the beginning, techs were like, we don't want you to sell out. But I think I found a way to do it without selling out so that I'm not, catering to the vendors. I can still talk openly, about a vendor if I, have an issue with them and stuff. But I am, trying to be respectful of the vendors in the space. The same with other MSPs. If MSPs are, doing some bad stuff in our industry, we got to be able to call that out. But at the same time, be respectful and acknowledge the ones that are doing good and stuff. So monetarily speaking, it's allowed me to go to these conferences. I can get better tools, better microphone, better mixers, find better services for hosting and streaming and stuff. So there's a part of that is exciting to see, okay, what can I do with the podcast that people are going to resonate with? Can I live stream, in remote locations and have people interested in that? Can I go visit other businesses and highlight them? I don't want to be like the YouTube person where I've got a camera and I'm just walking around and all of that stuff. So I am trying to figure out what the next steps are for the podcast. It has just been, it's been eye-opening to what the possibilities are, because, back in the day, it was just, two people sitting on a, Google Hangout and chatting and then throwing up an audio feed, where, now there's more things that I can be doing with video and streaming, and again, access to new guests And it'll be interesting to see where that goes.
Yeah, so it is super interesting to see where it goes. And especially from an industry perspective, we can make our best predictions, but they're just that. This is amazing. I would love for you to share what's your what you think would be most helpful if you got somebody listening that maybe maybe they want to run a solo IT shop. And maybe they're too big and they want to be smaller. Maybe they're too small and they want to be bigger. Maybe they're just not happy. Is there a book, a conference, any takeaways you have? Peer group, I don't know, but because you've been doing this for a while, and I've interviewed some MSPs that are larger or smaller that are not happy. So there's just a level you've reached of happiness, I think, and a level, it seems like, with your clients where you have some synergy that not everybody reaches. So what do you think would be most helpful?
Well, I think the first thing is to find a way to get the support you need. And it might be stepping out of the comfort zone. For instance, peer groups. There are a lot of peer group opportunities out there now that, will be supportive of you no matter which part of the journey you're on. Mm-hmm. I know that ASCII has actually formed a set of peer groups where they put similar type businesses together, similar in size, similar in revenue. So they do have groups that are for the small, solo, 1-2-man shops. They do have medium size, they have large. So you can kind of get that support from the group because they're going to be just like you. Mm-hmm. I know that a lot of the other vendors, the HTGs and this stuff, there are peer groups out there for what you want to do. Now, you just might not be able to find them. So reaching out to me, I mean, I'm sure you know a lot of places where you can refer people to. You can find those support groups for you. Again, I do believe that the industry is big enough that there can be all size companies in this space.
Yeah.
And there are vendors at every level that will support you. And you just need to, find them. And if you can't, reach out to me. I'll guide you. And I don't know if I'm answering your question exactly the way you wanted to, but there's so much opportunity out there that there's really not a reason to not succeed if you want to. You might be willing, you might have to do a little extra work, but I think that's, maybe a little old school to say this, but, sometimes you got to work.
Very true. Very true. Well, Uncle Marv, if you would plug, help everybody figure out how to find you. If they just heard that or anything else, they loved it, where's the best way to find your podcast, to find your business, to find you online? So
I just redesigned a landing page at unclemarv.com. So if you're going to want to hear any of my podcasts, go there and you will find the IT Business Podcast, the Unhealthy Podcast, and the Unfamous Podcast. So that's probably one place to go if you want to listen to podcasts, and then that will direct you to the individual landing pages for each podcast. If you want to just connect with me, you can find me on LinkedIn and the Facebook, and just look for Marvin B and you'll find me there.
I love that. Well, thank you. I really appreciate from the bottom of my heart the time you and energy you put in today. Thank you so much for being on MSP Mindset.
Well, thanks for having me, and I hope I gave your listeners something to think about.